Welcome to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast with your host, Tony Guerra. The Pharmacy Leaders Podcast is a member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network, with interviews and advice on building your professional network, brand, and a purposeful second income from students, residents, and innovative professionals.
Hey, welcome to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast. It's going to be probably 3 days a week, maybe. We'll try to keep up with that. I thought that I wouldn't be talking to too many people over the summer, but I've talked to a couple of people. An optometrist who wrote one of the E-Myth books, so if you're familiar with the E-Myth series, it's sold millions and millions of copies. And it's basically, if we end up being, I know provider status isn't going through this year, or it looks like that's not going to happen, but if we do get it, then we become solo practitioners. And what can end up happening, like it does for optometrists and accountants and physicians and those that can have their own practice, is that it takes over our lives. And instead of having a systemized position that fulfills us, we end up just having a job that imprisons us. And we'll get to hear from Dr. Uglum, who's an optometrist up here in New Hampton, Iowa, but he was close with Michael E. Gerber in creating that book, and that was really cool. We will hear from Kobo this week. I'll put that episode up. I want to do a little bit of an intro because I just put my books up on Kobo, and when you're self-publishing and there's little tweaks to it, if you do it on lulu.com but you hit Kobo, you're limited in the categories that it's going to go in. So I was being ranked as a nonfiction book of all nonfiction books. And you don't really want that. What you want is to be very specific about your category, pharmacology or whatever it is, so that you can get a much higher ranking and get noticed by people that are looking to read your book. So I'll definitely have that as well. And then I'm looking forward to, I'll talk a little bit more about his podcast, but interviewing MedEd 101's Eric Christensen. So that'll be cool. Coming up. So a lot of fun this summer, and I'll try to make it fun as well. Okay, Next Generation Pharmacist Awards. You still have 6 days to sign up for this. If you want to see me getting my runner-up award, you can. I'm at 346 on the YouTube video. The 2017 Next Generation Pharmacist Awards highlights. My daughters came with me to San Diego with my wife, and it was very cool. But just like having kids, my daughter, we were at the San Diego Zoo, and an hour before I actually went up to receive the award, one of my kiddos runs into this boy, and they just bonk and hit each other, and she passes out and stops breathing. And so we have this event, but my wife and I have been so, used to so much happening that we just said, we just were able to take care of it. She saw the doctor at the San Diego Zoo. This doctor was able to work with humans, and she was fine. She got a stuffed animal. They all came back. Daddy, did you win? And I told them I couldn't explain runner-up to him, so yeah, I won. And then, anyway, it was a lot of fun. But my point of this is, I think if you have someone that that is one of the best pharmacists that whether it's they're a new practitioner or let me just look at the award categories. So Next Generation Pharmacist is the highest award. So of the awardees, this person would get it. Whether they're a civic leader, an entrepreneur. I think you have to own a pharmacy to get that one. Future pharmacist, so it could be a student. Health system pharmacist. Lifetime leadership. Patient care provider. Rising star, so last 5 years. Specialty pharmacist. Technician. And then what I got was the Technology Innovator Award for 2017. So highly recommend the Next Generation Pharmacist Awards and nominating someone. And you can nominate yourself if you think that you've done something and that, go ahead and nominate yourself. It could happen. Going to the blogs, TLDR Pharmacy came out with a new FDA approval, and Trogarzo is ibalizumab, which is for HIV, but it is the very first monoclonal antibody for HIV. So it's been about 10 years since anything new's come out in terms of mechanism of action. So that's exciting news. And as usual, TLDR's posts are just, and that's the thing. It's really an entertaining way to read new information that comes out. I'm going to be, like many of you guys, I'll be doing some of my CEs a little bit later in the year, like within the month of when they're due. And that is painful, but this, I always love reading his blogs. So that was the TLDR Pharmacy. Happy PharmD talks about LinkedIn and how, we have, I have 5,000 LinkedIn connections, and it's true, I would know like 100 or 200 of them on site, and that's just kind of how this works. But every once in a while, I run into someone and strike up a conversation on LinkedIn, and it's also an easy way to kind of communicate with some people. If you're not doing Facebook Messenger, if you're not Facebook friends, you can be LinkedIn associates, I guess. I don't know what they are. Are they LinkedIn friends? And so I think LinkedIn can be a great way, especially if you're somebody that's looking for a job, and maybe that's why I don't get as much out of LinkedIn, because I'm not looking for a job. One of the Pharmacy Times contributors was really fun. Matt Paterini, non-traditional pharmacist, part of the Pharmacy Podcast Network too, but he interviewed Danielle Brill, who's vice president of equity research at Needham & Company, and The Wolf of Pharmacy Wall Street is the title, and it was just kind of cool to hear a pharmacist on Wall Street. So if you're the kind of person that watches like those kinds of movies, Wall Street, The Big Short, The Wolf of Wall Street, I think you'll really enjoy that. But that one kind of popped out at me. And then going from aggressive investing to more conservative investing, the Your Financial Pharmacist team had should I pay off my house early or invest? And I wanted to make sure that I talked about that real quick. So it's the satisfaction that someone would have would be immense if you paid off your house. But I was thinking about this and talking to my tenants yesterday, and we were talking about LLCs and things like that, and making sure you protect your house. And when you're renting to somebody or you're renting to people, you really want to make sure you have all the protections in place, and if something happens, that you have the insurance that you need. And I was saying, well, should I just pay it off and then buy another house? But really, that doesn't really make a ton of sense. You would really buy another house and just continue to maybe pay down aggressively. But what they were talking about was a mathematical calculation saying, I believe I'm going to get 7% returns on my investments in the future. How does that match mathematically to me paying off what the current interest rate is? And my thought on it is, if I did pay off the mortgage on the rental property, and I could probably do it in a year, then what would happen? So I would be without my cash reserve. If I went to the bank and asked for a mortgage or a loan, the cheapest loan I could get would be the mortgage on a rental property. So I would just be doing the same thing over again. As far as our personal home, I think we're going to have to look at taxes next year, kind of see how things played out with this new tax code where there's a bigger deductible or something like that. And not deductible, I'm too pharmacied out. There's a bigger, I don't remember what the word is, standard deduction. There's a bigger standard deduction. Though I think we'll still be in the position where we benefit because we're not really in a high income place. So I think there's a limit of $10,000 that you can deduct, and we just don't have that expensive a house. Well, and then we're in such a we only owe 50%. Like our loan to value ratio is like 50. So there's just not a lot of money that we're paying each month for mortgage. But I would definitely recommend that show. Should I pay off my house early or invest? And do be careful though, because that's a false dichotomy. The person asked that question, so they answered that question. So I'm not criticizing the guys at YFP. I'm just saying that those aren't your only two options. Your other option is to create what I would call like a capital account, which is basically just saying, I'm just going to create this account and I'm going to keep finding opportunities. And if you do watch The Big Short, you look at, kind of what Michael Burry was doing in that movie. He was just saying, okay, well, I pick stocks and I do a good job with that, but there's this opportunity here because the market's going to collapse in housing where I can short it and I can make a ton of money and very high returns on investment, and that's what's available. So, I don't know if I necessarily wanted a rental home, but I found one that I knew that I would get a good return on the initial investment because I knew I was getting it for less than the value. I knew that I could put some money into it and it would increase the value, and I knew that it would rent because of the just square footage. So having that large capital account allows you to find investments that are maybe a little bit more non-traditional and that are paying much higher rates of return. So my rate of return, when I'm looking at an investment, I'm looking for rates of return of 50 to 100% if I'm going to even mess with it, especially with something like a book. Like I'll put in, 5,000. So the cost of this last book that I made was around, I don't know. I want to say I put about 5,000 all in. So I'm expecting at least that much back, in addition to my original. So, and I did the same thing with real estate. When I became a real estate agent, I put 5,000 into coaching, and I said, hey, you know what? At the end of this year, I just want to know that my real estate business that I've created after expenses has doubled my money. I put in 5,000 to work with you. I want 10,000 back at the end of the year. So my money back plus $5,000. And that's kind of how I look at things. And then, do I use conservative investments? Yeah, I still have a rental home that's being paid off, and I pay off a little bit ahead of time. So I kind of balance them, but really my goal is I don't want to say Buffett because that's in the billions, but like we'll call it mini Buffett, just a small account that I want to keep growing as kind of an investment account that's more fun with something that I control and know a lot about, which would be audiobooks, especially in nonfiction technical books. Talk to Your Pharmacist podcast, so building your pharmacy consulting business with Blair Thielemeyer. She's always really great in terms of, her story. If you'd not heard it, I definitely listen to it. She had, was pregnant at the time she lost her pharmacy job, and this was a long time ago. Well, not terribly long ago, but she was pregnant when she lost her pharmacy job, and necessity, the mother of invention, and she created her own company, and now she is able to work from home, and I think she does it a couple days a week, so she has plenty of time to spend with the family. PharmacyJoe.com. Again, these guys, Pharmacy Joe's always like way over my head in terms of the critical care stuff he does, but always refer him if you are critically care minded or if you are interested in that to really start understanding the ways that you would answer those residency interview questions or the way that you talk with other practitioners at a very, very high level. New podcast, well, relatively new. I think he started in February, but I wanted to wait till he got a couple of episodes going. So MedEd 101's Eric Christensen has real life pharmacology, and every week he's going over a different drug class, drug state. Another episode just went out yesterday, the 5-alpha reductase inhibitors, and he goes about the length of Pharmacy Joe's, about 7 minutes. He's been going anywhere from 7 minutes to 14 minutes, depending. It's tough to talk about antipsychotics in less than 15 minutes. But these are really fantastic in terms of getting an idea of, in clinical practice. So I learned this in school, what actually happens in practice. And he's been a long time clinical practitioner, and I trust his pharmacology advice. So that's the Real Pharmacology Podcast. Helix Talk, episode 78, transitioning from school to practice, advice for new practitioners. I don't know. When you hear three academics talking about retail, it's kind of like, I don't know. It was... I think they did a good job trying to kind of make some points about the things that you want to keep up with in terms of, your your knowledge base and some good tips about that. But they were talking about things that in retail are absolutely brutal, which are the weekends that retail pharmacists have to work, especially if you're every other, nights and weekends, and then that appies are kind of a fiction in that you work this 8 to 4 or 9 to 5, and no weekends, and that's just not how it is in the real practice. So I don't know. It was worth the listen, but it was just kind of like. When you hear 3 people with 9 to 5 jobs talking about people that don't have 9 to 5 jobs, there was just a little bit of a disconnect there. But I always like Helix Talk. It's always an interesting conversation to listen to. Richard's monumental podcast interview on building brand. So Dr. Richard Waith down in Florida, he spends, I think, about 45 minutes talking about how about his brand and how that kind of came to be, but also how he got a lot of exposure for a LinkedIn, something he wrote on LinkedIn, and then he's also on Medium, which is another kind of blog. So he's very altruistic, always giving away a lot of good content, so I recommend RX Radio as well. Let's see, Core Consult RX. So I don't think he has anything necessarily new, but I really like the way he goes through the cases, and really if you're a preceptor, it's kind of this is how I would go through such and such case and so forth. So I don't know, I'm just a big fan of Core Consult as well. I think I forgot to do the mothership report, so let me make sure I get that, because I think what had happened was I clicked from Hillary was on the Pharmacy Podcast Network, and then I always talk about her blog. So, but Monday on the mothership was expanding your compounding business, and this was actually very, very good in terms of hearing what it is you can add if you own a pharmacy. In terms of those things that have very little to do with the drugs that we're dispensing, but other things. And I only connected with it really well because I was talking to the E-Myth author, who talked about how in optometrics or as an optometrist, there are a lot of health things, especially in terms of taking care of your eyes and the right antioxidants and vitamins and things like that that need to come along with it. So a really good episode there. Income Outcomes Show, they talked about waypoints, and a waypoint is when I want to actually find the definition, because they talked about it as you get off course and then you come back. So a waypoint is actually an end of a leg of a course, especially one whose coordinates have been generated by a computer. So basically they were saying like a waypoint would be graduation, or a waypoint would be marriage or something like that. And that you need to kind of reevaluate every time, you have a waypoint or something like that. But that was probably one of the best income outcome shows I'd listened to. I really, really enjoyed it. And then Hillary Blackburn is the guest on PGX for Pharmacists. And I think that you'll really enjoy that episode as well. All right, so just a couple of YouTubers. So Mudit Verma, he was nice enough to come on the Pharmacy Leaders podcast, and he talked about traveling the world during pharmacy school, and he has certainly done that. And he's on with Kevin Yee on Kevin Yee Pharmacy on YouTube, and then Brian Fung, A Day in the Life of an Informatics Pharmacist. So I went a little bit long, but have a good holiday weekend. As always, if you have a show that you want to hear, let me know, or a topic you want to hear. And then if you want to put together an interview and you want to publish it, if you're a micropreneur, you're making under $100,000 a year or something like that, I'm happy to help you promote whatever it is that you're working on, whether it's a book or a course or something like that. Just let me know. You can always contact me on Facebook Messenger or on LinkedIn, whichever. So happy Memorial Day weekend. I will talk to you guys next week.
Support for this episode comes from the audiobook Memorizing Pharmacology, a relaxed approach. With over 9,000 sales in the United States, United Kingdom, and Australia, it's the go-to resource to ease the pharmacology challenge. Available on Audible, iTunes, and Amazon.com, in print, ebook, and audiobook. Thank you for listening to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast with your host, Tony Guerra. Be sure to share the show with the hashtag #PharmacyLeaders.